Welcome back to our show, Make It of American Entrepreneur. Definitely today's show is going to be interesting because today we're going to talk about the boot theory. We're also going to talk about some hacks. Now, when I say hacks, we're talking about different techniques that we can utilize that other people have done that's tried and true from the mistakes that they already made that eliminates us from making those same mistakes if we actually listen and utilize the techniques. Now, on today's show, I'm going to parallel it between what you can do as an executive or a CEO in a company if you are an entrepreneur, some of the stuff that I had to learn as I was growing and building a company here in America. At the same time, these things also these executives were using in their personal life, which means they paralleled it. So what is the boot theory? What is it? The boot theory is a state where people in poverty have to buy a surplus product that need to be replaced repeatedly, proving more expensive in the long run. The more the expensive the item is, the more you need to think about it. Now, a poor person, from a standpoint of, we're not talking about financially poor, we're really just talking about a person who's in a situation where they're making poor choices. Sometimes we use this term poor, and it's really defining the choice of the person, not the economic structure or situation of the person. A poor person who uses poor judgment when it comes to allocating funds, whether they're running a corporation or not. I had to learn this lesson myself. I used to be a poor person from a standpoint of the allocations and the way I thought about allocations early on in my business career. Buys a $100 pair of boots every year. The total over 5 years will cost him 500. A person who has experience will pay $250 for some boots every 5 years. The total 5 years cost will be $250. So it is a difference in perspective. And the reason that's important, because here is the first hack for the day on the show. And when I say hack, I'm saying it from a standpoint that we need to parallel this with the decisions that you're making. Today's economy causes us to really look at things differently than we looked at it before. We need to really take the perspective and ask ourselves this question. Am I prepared for the ebbs and flows, the downturns in the market? And at the same time, if I am not prepared, what could I do to be prepared that if something came up, I get disabled, especially if you are one person that's running on an organization, whether it's an LLC or C Corp, or maybe you invested with your brother and your brother does everything. You provided the capital. Well, if that's the situation, then what happens if he's not able to get up in the morning and do the task in order for you to get your money back? That could be catastrophic. So this is some things that CEOs have stated that they started to implement in their personal and their business life. First hack of the day. They pay their corporation mortgage biweekly. Now, you've heard of biweekly mortgages in your personal life. Well, they're doing this with the same understanding that they're going to reduce some interest that they're paying. But at the same time, if something comes up, they want to be 6 months to a year where they actually have the money. And that's important to know. Another hack. When it comes to investing, again, as an entrepreneur, you're thinking about, I'm bringing in a new product. And when you're bringing a new product, this is a new money I'm allocating for a new investment to strengthen the overall synergy of the products and services that we offer to the market. Well, a lot of these corporations actually have started having financial advisors that have institutional investor advisor, whether they have a hedge fund or whether they have a institutional investor advisor. They do this in a business life as well. You probably have in your personal life a financial advisor, or you have a broker's account that you're managing yourself. Well, in that regards, you allocate money all the time. The goal is to beat 92% of the active managers in the long term. So when you think about, as a company, you're an executive, you have your institutional advisor sitting there, you're having a conversation with them. I have an institutional advisor. When I sit down with my institutional advisor, me and him are having a conversation. My goal is to beat the financial advisors, 92% of them, literally. He's there, he's representing the interests of the company, but my goal is to beat 92% of fund managers, period. Well, if you do that, that means that your returns are going to be more lucrative on the aspect of your corporation than on the returns of yourself. Then if you do this in your business life, you're going to do it in your personal life. Those days of seeing 5% annually returns, those days of seeing 7%, which means the rule of 72 is every 7 years, or actually every 12 years if it's 6%. But if it's six, is every rule of 72 divided by 12, tell you every 6 years your money double. If it's 7, it's going to be a little bit more, a little bit less than 6 years. Your goal is to beat it, period. Here's another thing that executives are doing right now. They're actually paying their corporate credit cards weekly. If customers pay, they're paying. They have never been late, but they've always been ahead because they're using the card anyway. So they just go ahead and they just pay it weekly. If they were getting paid every 2 weeks on a corporate level, they're doing the same thing in their personal life. And what they're noticing is that they're not only are they being ahead, but they're getting out of the habit of just charging everything on the card if they don't need to be. So this helped them be more disciplined. But there's two more hacks coming up, and then I'll explain another theory so you can understand how this is very important. When it comes to the purchases that CEOs and executives do, they think about the cost per use or the cost per hour. Now, how many of you guys are doing that right now? Before you even buy something, you're saying to yourself, I need to think about the cost per use of this thing or the cost per price. Are you doing that? Are you consistently checking yourself to make sure that you are removing all forms of impulsivity that can possibly take place if you make this transaction? Because if you're not, it's so important that you begin to incorporate this experience hacks to say, I never thought about that. I have a business I'm operating. I see something that I want. I never thought about the cost per use. I mean, how many times am I going to use this? Do I really got to buy this right now? Because the cost per use is maybe only twice a year. Can I rent it? If I can't rent it, can I borrow it from somebody? Do somebody else have access to it? Because I'm not really using this much. And for the cost of acquiring that asset, which we like to always call the opportunity cost, and the results of getting out. And the question is this support? Or is this really to increase revenue? It's a tool that you use to increase revenue, or is it just support? And if you're only going to have a support item that you're going to use just 2 times out of a year, it means you don't need to do it. You don't have enough where it justifies buying that, because twice a year, and when you do it twice a year and it's support, which means it doesn't even help the bottom line. It just makes my job. Prime example, you can't see it, but on my wall, I have a dry eraser board. But in every conference room that I tend to go into, other than one, has it too. So do I really have to have one in my office? Interesting, right? Because if they're all throughout the conference rooms and anywhere else I need access to it, I mean, every office has a dry eraser board. So do I really need one in my office if every office that I have access to have one in it? The answer is that's a lot of support, and it is there for a tool. It has a utility, but at the same time, it is not going to generate any money for me. It's an actual cost, and you cannot run a business with that philosophy. Now, I share that because when we think about business, we have to do this every week. Today is Thursday. Today is when I do my financial wellness checklist. So I'm going to walk you through my checklist. Hopefully, if you've never done your checklist before, you'll see it. You'll see it on the screen as well. But this is what it looks like. It has a category of 1, 2, and 3. 1 being red, 2 being yellow, 3 being green. Now, the budget is number 1 is don't know what my budget is. For a company that doesn't know what its budget is, means they're shooting from the hip. And at the same time, numbers are present and agreements have been made. So the numbers should be known. It shouldn't be, I don't know what they are. So number 1 is red. I don't even know what my budget is. If you run a business that way, you run your personal life that way. And if you run your personal life that way, it's a 99% chance you're going to run your business that way. So part of my wellness checklist is to make sure I never run my business with I don't know. Number 2, which is yellow, it says don't have a budget. So 1 is red, don't know my budget. Yellow is don't have a budget. It is a difference between the two. 1 is I'm lazy. I'm never going to think about a budget. What? A budget? No one's going to put me in restraint. The other one is I don't have a budget, which means I know what my numbers are, but I am not budgeting for anything outside of those numbers. And number 3 being green, I track my monthly budget. I track it. I know exactly I know where I have to improve at. I know when things are stopping and I won't repeat that same decision. Sometimes we have a one-time cost, sometimes we have a 90-day cost, sometimes we have a 6-month, sometimes we have a 36-month cost. But in the process of that, it needs to make sure that we understand what those budgets are. The next one is going to be net worth, especially or for a company, retain earnings. If you're an individual and you're not running a business, you look at your net worth. If you're a company, you're looking at your return earnings and the company's overall value. What is the company's value in cash? Well, number 1, don't know what I'm worth. Number 2, don't know my own net worth. Number 3, track my net worth regularly. Period. That means every decision where you allocate funds, you're actually taking a step back and looking and seeing if I'm buying this, will it increase my overall net worth? Now, when we think about overall increase, we're not referring to a bunch of items that depreciate that you get to write off. We're referring to something that's a utility that increases in value over time. Most of us are buying things that we hope the greater fool theory. And the greater fool theory is always realize that somebody's willing to pay more than this idiot that bought it originally for what I purchased, especially if it's not a utility. It's a support product or it's a want, but it's not necessarily a need. The other thing we want to look at is our debt. Do you have as a company outstanding invoice, outstanding payment issues with the landlord or anyone else? If you do, you're number one. You need to stop what you're doing. Number two, working towards clearing any form of misunderstanding of allocations. If you're an individual, you're talking about, really, I got bad credit, got bad debt. Next one is I'm working towards clearing that bad debt and free of all bad debt. And on the company side, I am free to allocate money without any restrictions. Next thing is going to be the actual investing. Again, notice investing never goes away. It's going to be in every one of my financial wellness is always thinking about this. Am I investing? And investing is not stored value. And I think a lot of people think about that stored value. Investing by definition for a company is income. A company can never run on the infrastructure is I'm putting money aside every month and I'm not going to get paid at all in a 12-month basis in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. I just want you to know that is not investing, that is saving, and do not confuse the two. One is accumulation of cash in a stored asset. The other one is increasing value with income as the value increases as I gain more income. And next thing is exit strategy. Some people I have written down that you notice on the screen, it says retirement, but the reality is your exit strategy. Have thought about it. That's number one. That's red. Haven't thought about it. Number two is have a loose retirement goal. That's number two. That's yellow. And number three, I have a retirement plan. And that's what it is as an individual. As a business, is actually exit strategy. You don't have an exit strategy. Listen, guys, we need to be real about it. Some of us have the concept in our minds that we only have one thing we can do in life. Well, if there's many times people build companies in America and then they replace it with another CEO and they go build something else and they sit on the board after that. I mean, you need to put yourself in a position where you can start doing more non-labor and intellectual decisions versus doing labor and no intellectual and labor and no board. You need to really think about that overall. Another point I'll bring up, though, is how important it is to make it to the 1% tier. Now, everything I'm talking to you right now about is important that you want to implement into your business that you don't want to not include. But here's something to think about, okay? Wealth in the U.S. has become significantly more concentrated among the 1% of the wealthiest individuals in the last 30 years. We're going all the way back from 1990 into 2022. We noticed in 1990 it was 17%. It currently takes $5.8 million in wealth in cash or asset producing, assets that produce an income, whether monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or yearly, to be among the wealthiest in America. That is the new. It's not a million, guys. It's 5.8 million. So we go 17% in 1990. And between 1995 and right at there at 2000, it was 20%. In 2024, it was 2005, it was 24% of that made up everybody in the U.S. In 2015, it's again the 24% makes up that 1% tier of all the population in the U.S. And then in 2024, where we at right now, or 2022, if you want to look at it, because this is the statistics at that particular time, it's 27%. So $5.8 million to make it to the 1% of the wealthiest in America. We're not talking about the billionaire list. We're just saying out of all the population of individuals, you're on the upper tier if you make 5.8 million. This is why a lot of athletes, a lot of people that's in between sports, anybody who's a pro at anything, whether they're gambling, whether it's playing cricket, even if it means being a podcaster or a content creator here on Spotify, or even if you got a show like I have on Spotify or on YouTube or Instagram, this makes up that 1%. It's that 5.8 million in wealth to be among the wealthiest. Now, I say that because if you don't know it, then you can't shoot for it. Remember, you can't measure what you can't manage. And if you can't measure it, then there's no way you can ever manage it. And most people don't operate that way in the first place because for them, they're like, well, whatever. Now, You can live from paycheck to paycheck, or you can live from asset to growth. And that's what you should be thinking about. Acquiring assets. In America, in order to retire, we all know we have to have some form of an asset that is producing income. Other than that, we're just saving. That's all we're really doing. You're just saving. Back in the day, there was a concept among the people is to put money on the mattress, put money in the jar, put money in the hole in the ground, all these things, but it didn't produce any compound interest. So growth gets crazy with compound interest. And that's what you're doing. When you bring a bunch of people together in a business, that's called synergy. That's compound activity. And that's also one of the eighth wonders of the world is compounding. When you get a bunch of people on the same page, there's nothing can stop them. When you get an asset generating money at a better rate than 92%, as I mentioned earlier, 92% of the people who actually are managing someone else's money, then you have some great compounding. Investing with the long-term mindset with your company or as an individual most reliably is a way to build wealth. Building principles that take time, but the power of compounding will take over. Investing $500 per month with a 7% annual rate, you take the rule of 72, it'll tell you how long will it actually take in order for it to grow. And you're looking at it over a period of 40 years. Now, if you have a business, you're not even saying, I'm 30 years down the road, I'm thinking about this, or 40 years down the road, I'm thinking about this. Because your job is to beat 92%. So 7%, literally, if that's your starting point, that means every year, if you're doing 7% this year, you got to make allocation choices that's 9% the next, allocation choices that's 10% the next, allocation choices that's 12% the next, 22, 50, then we see compound interest take over. And that's where you see the 280%. That only happens because we're managing and we're measuring. And without those two ingredients, you can't get these outcomes, guys. And that's important to know. But in 10 years, taking $500 at 7%, this is over 10 years, you would literally have $60,000 and $26,000 in actually compound interest. That's $86,000 total over 10 years. That I'm just telling you, at 7%, if you're running a business, that is a horrible. That's like bonds. That's right now you can probably get 7% bonds, but you're not gonna be able to get that when we move out of a bear market into a bull market. But the reality is that's 7%. In 20 years, you would have put aside 120,000. You would have had compound interest that kicked in of 134K. You now have 250K. That's 20 years. I mean, for a lot of people that's working on a job and you making 80,000 a year, or even you making 100,000 a year, that's 2 years and a couple of months of living. After 20 years of setting aside $500, that is skunkalicious right there. That's a stink that you need to just think about. You're trying to tell me that I was making 100,000 and the day I stopped working, I'm only going to make 250K. That's it. 2.5 years. What do you stop working for? See, most people are not looking at that. Like, oh, I got 254,000. Well, again, remember, if you're not trying to go back to work and you're making 100,000 a year, that $5.8 million being part of that 1% is key important, because at that particular point, and you take the position, I mean, anybody could take it. I'm going to take it right here and just do it in real time. Because if I do it in real time, it's going to even make more sense. If you take 120,000 and you do that times they say 100,000 times 0.70, 7% too. That's only $8,400. $8,400 at 7% a year. In no way in the world can you start working at that rate. And if you have a business, you need your retained earnings. You're retaining 7% of your earnings. That's probably good at the starting up. But again, you got to improve every year. You got to squeeze it out. You should be up to 33%. You say, how am I doing that? Because the allocations you're doing in between the products that you bring to the table, you're going to be so concentrated on focusing on making the right decision with the allocation. Because as I mentioned earlier, per hour use or per hour, period. Don't allocate it if you can't determine it that way. Over 30 years now, if you've been doing this for 30 years, you would have saved 180K in actual $500 payments. Compound interest will be 405K. It took you 30 years to do that. You now have $500,000, 585K. We keep going. 40 years. So if I'm starting a business, I'm at 40. If I started a job, I'm at 40. I'm 80 now. And what will I have? Will I get to that magic number of 5.8 in 2022 to 2024? And the answer is absolutely not. I would have put in 240K at keeping the minimum of 500 per month, keeping a basic rate of 7% annually. I would have 996,000 actually in compound interest with 1.2 million. And again, that's 1.2 million literally 1.2 million in actual total money. 40 years though. Now at that particular rate, if you're making 100,000 a year, guess what? You got 10 years. So you're expecting to pass away at 90. That's what you're thinking about. Because if you're drawing down off that money at 100,000 is your benchmark, unless you're making less, you can already see I got 10 more years. But once you hit 90 from 80, you're terrified. Because once you get to 91, 92, you're out of money. So you got to think about that 7% from that standpoint of, am I basing it on getting the same income? Or I'm going to the raccoon bandits where I'm going to look like the individuals that are dumpster dive in order for me to eat. You shouldn't have to take a step down, make better choices while you're stepping up now. You get where I'm coming from? Well, that's the hacks I want to bring to you today. I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to see you tomorrow as we continue talking about the things we have to do. And this is I took this show today to kind of explain to you the keys to the shortcut for people who got experience that you can incorporate in your business life and in your personal life to be successful. That was really my approach today. I wanted to make sure that as you understand, as making of an entrepreneur, the task that I have to do, the decisions that I got to make, I have to be able to think differently and I have to make better choices. See you tomorrow.